Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We will be getting started here in just a few minutes with today's webinar. As you join us, if you can let us know that you can hear us by typing in what state you're coming to us from in the question and answer field, in the Q&A field in your Zoom control panel. We'll give just a few more minutes for everybody to join us, and we'll be getting started just about at the top of the hour. Couple of early birds joining us from Oregon and North Carolina, Virginia, New York, all across the states. We have such a great representation. We've been getting such great turnout for all of these webinars that we've been hosting all across the country. For those of you just joining us, we will be getting started in just a few minutes here. Welcome, and thank you for taking the time to join us today. Please do confirm that you can hear us by typing in what state you're coming to us from in the Q&A panel. Later on in the webinar, we will be opening it up for questions. And we'll have our real estate expert answer those questions for you. So practicing with the Q&A panel now will give you a little head start. You're welcome to type those questions in as we go through the webinar, and we'll be addressing them at the end. So once again, for those of you just joining us, please do confirm that you can hear us and get some practice in using that Q&A panel by typing in what state you're coming to us from in the Q&A box in your Zoom control panel. We'll be getting started in just a minute here. We'll give just a few more minutes for some more participants to join. Once again, the Q&A box in your Zoom control panel is where you can type in what state you're coming to us from to let us know that you can hear us, as well as any questions that you might have throughout the webinar that we'll be able to address and answer at the end. That chat box is something a little bit different. We will be keeping an eye on the Q&A box, the question and answer box throughout the webinar for any questions that you might have. So for those of you just joining us, sort of a last call here, let us know that you can hear us by typing in what state you're coming to us from today. We'll be getting started in just a moment. All right, fantastic. Well, we are at the top of the hour. So once again, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. We hope that you're all safe and healthy, and we appreciate you taking the time to be here with us today. Once again, you will be able to participate in a live Q&A at the end of the webinar. So if you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into that Q&A area in your Zoom control panel where presumably you typed the state that you're coming to us from. And if you miss anything, don't worry, we will be sending out a link to the recorded session when it's available. Throughout the webinar, you'll also see poll questions related to the webinar topic. You can respond from whatever device you're using to view the webinar. No additional devices are necessary. My name is Jennifer Sterling, and I'm an instructional designer at the CE Shop, the leading provider of online real estate education. Today, we'll cover some tips to help you master scenario-based questions that may appear on your licensing exam, presented today by Jill Malloy. Jill is a national real estate expert at the CE Shop and comes to us with many years of experience in the real estate industry, including teaching, training, and coaching thousands of students. Now, without further ado, I will turn it over to Jill.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I appreciate it. You know, first I want to say that we are very appreciative of your attendance here. If you do have questions, if you would put them into the Q&A. I know that some of you are so accustomed to Zoom now, you immediately raise your virtual hand. Please don't do that. What will happen is we're going to go ahead and put the questions in when they occur to you. But Jen will go ahead and feed those to me at the end of the program. If you do have to, if you're having any difficulties or challenges, then you can also put that into the Q&A box, and there is someone monitoring it. That being said, let's get started with this and move right ahead. This is what we're going to do. In the next few minutes, we're going to ask you about your own progress. Those of you who have been with us before know that we always try to figure out with whom we're speaking so we can adjust it a little bit to the level of the group. Then we're going to do an overview of scenario questions. In that overview, one of the things that I am going to suggest that you do is check and make sure that you're even going to have to deal with scenario questions. If you aren't, you may choose to use this time, instead of watching this particular webinar, going to one of the ones that is on demand. After we've gone over the overview and looked at what scenario questions look like, we'll have time for questions and answers. And then Jen's going to share some additional resources with you and let you know what's coming up in the near future. So let's move through this. Here is your first question, where you can use that polling device built in and let us know how far you are in this course. You know, if you're 95% done, it doesn't hurt my feelings if you say done. It's kind of interesting because it looks like either we've got people on the front end of it with 25% or less probably done, or people who are just about done with it. So we'll make sure that we cover what you need. There we go. You can see exactly what it looks like. So now that we know what that looks like, we'll move ahead and look into scenario questions. And the first thing I wanted to show you is this. If you haven't already come across this link in your course that you're taking with us, we actually provide for you a link to the candidate guidebooks for the state in which you are taking the course. And that is a critically important piece of material that you want to read from cover to cover. The reason that I mention it right now is this. You may not face any scenario questions at all. You may not face them, and this guidebook will tell you whether or not you're going to face scenario questions. Elizabeth, I saw that you're here from Indiana. You're going to face scenario questions. You want to stay on, but the rest of you may want to check and see. So if your exam service for your state is PSI, then you would go to psiexams.com. You'd pick government state licensing agencies. You would pick your own state and the real estate exam. And once you did that, you would download the candidate information bulletin. And when you do that, make sure that you read everything, not just whether or not you have scenario questions, because it tells you how many questions, it tells you how many you have to get correct, it tells you how much time you have, and it tells you what your choices are for taking the exam. If you are taking this with AMP, which is now owned by PSI, but if you're taking it with AMP, they still do have some that go through the online.goamp.com. And if you go to that, then you pick, again, real estate, you go by category first, what state and which examination, and that will pull this up so that you can take the candidate handbook. And once again, you can download it. You can look at it online, but you can download it and have it available. And finally, if you're taking through Pearson VUE, it's home.pearsonvue.com. Here's where you'd put the examination, not the provider, but which examination you're taking. And that would bring you around to where you could pick up the candidate handbook. And once again, these links are also in your course, but if you want to get to them quickly, please know that you can just travel through the exam providers to get to it and find out if you're going to have scenario questions. If you are, then the first thing that we want to talk about is what exactly is a scenario question? What is it? And I'm going to tell you that it's a question that has lots of different faces, and they're very similar, but they don't look exactly alike. So here's what I want you to know. One form of scenario, and I know that one of the states that I saw this in was in Missouri, was a long story, very long, and it kept changing just when you thought you knew what was going to happen. So it started with a listing, and after the listing the buyer was looking at it, and after the buyer looked at it, they put in an offer. And it went all the way through till the closing. And with all of that long story, you had questions on it. And then there's the relatively short story. Most of those that have a relatively short story have a twist to them. They have more than the 4 answer choices. And this can throw you if you're not expecting it. So often they will have 6 answer choices, 6 of them. And they may have more than one correct answer, but they're going to weight the correct answers differently. And I'll show you that in just a moment. And then sometimes the scenario question is based on either a closing disclosure or it's based on a contract that's filled in. Now, when you see that, the questions obviously are going to relate to the transaction that's represented by the closing disclosure or the contract. And you may be identifying where information should be put that's not there, or you may be filling in the blanks to say what number belongs in a blank. So just be somewhat familiar with the fact that it could be any one of those. And if you look at your candidate guidebook, it will give you a little more information about what kind of scenario questions you might expect on your exam. So here's the question I have for you. This is a timed examination. And I know that when we're taking a timed examination, we all feel like we're racing against the clock. We are just racing. And we know that if we don't get all the questions answered, the ones we leave unanswered are incorrect. So I have my next question for you. On a timed examination, the best method for tackling scenario questions, is it to go directly to the questions and find out what they're going to ask you and then go locate them? Or is it to read the entire scenario and then read the questions and locate the answer? And if you like something else, well, I don't have a way for you to tell me that. And this, oh, we're still getting answers in. I'm sorry, I was about to call time on it and I won't yet. Okay, I think we can end the poll here. Look at it. So most of you said that you would rather read the entire scenario, then read the question and locate the answer for it. And here's what I'm going to tell you. I wish there were one right answer to this. Truth is, there's not. What I want to do is share with you what these questions look like to give you a better feel for how you might want to do this. I know for me, generally, it is to do exactly what most of you felt. I want to read the whole thing through, even though I'm racing against a clock. I have time to read it. Then I want to go to the questions, but that way I have an idea whether or not things have changed throughout the scenario. So here we go with one type of scenario question. Here is one. This is the short scenario question. By the way, I took this one directly from one of the candidate guidebooks. This happened to be the one for New Mexico, but this could have been Indiana. This could have been a lot of different places. So it tells you a short story. You're hosting the open house. The Martins come into the house. You greet them. You show it to them. They tell you the house is what they're looking for. They're very interested in purchasing it. And then you give them information, showing them lots of different financing options with down payment options. And Mr. Martin says they've been working with Mary Hempstead of Double X Realty. Before leaving, you thank them for coming. You give them your business card. So there is the scenario. This is a short scenario, but here are the questions. First thing on Monday morning, Mrs. Martin calls. She indicates they've tried to reach Mary. They can't reach Mary. They can't reach their agent. They indicate they have a written buyer's agent agreement with Mary's broker, And by the way, in the real world, they'll say they have it with Mary. They're afraid someone else is going to buy the house. They don't want to miss out on it. Which of the following should you do? And what you're asked to do is select the best answer. So I just want to walk through these. One thing you could do is run to your supervising broker and get some advice on it. There's one idea. I don't mind that one. I think that one might have some merit. I don't know how you feel about it. I want you to be thinking which ones you like. Tell them to come on over to your office. And that seems to me as though it may be a prelude to my putting together the purchase offer for them. And I don't have a big problem with that because I'm thinking to myself, well, I'm the seller's agent. And if they can't reach their own agent, what am I supposed to do? What if they lose this house? And, you know, I don't have a horrible problem with that. I don't like it, but I don't have a horrible problem. I look at number 3, ask them to bring the buyer agency agreement to you for your interpretation. And the moment I see that, I think I'm not supposed to be interpreting legal contracts. So I'm just going to skip right over that. I don't give it even a thought. I could tell them, just hang in there, reach your agent. I could tell them, if you can't reach your agent, well, call her broker, call her supervising broker. I'll tell you what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to tell them that I'm really sorry and there's nothing I can do. That one I won't do. Now, I want you all, there is no poll question here, nothing to open up, but I want you to pick your first and second choices. And I'll only give you about 10 seconds to do it because you don't have to let anyone else know about it. I hope everyone has their first and second choice answers. Now, this is what's interesting. There are 6 choices. 2 of them give you points and 4 of them don't. And here is how this short scenario works. If you say you should seek advice from your supervising broker, you just got 2 points for that question. If you tell them to come on into your office because you've got a seller and they're not able to reach their agent, and honestly, what you're thinking is the other agent and the 2 brokers will work out whatever they need to work out, but I'm not going to let these people miss out on the house because of it. You get 1 point. If you take any of the other 4 answers, you get no points. You get no points. There are only 2 answers that have points. Now, what you see about this is it does ask you to make a judgment, but the judgment is based on what you know. And it really is kind of complicated because you have to think about your agency responsibility to the seller, the fact that there is another agent who has a relationship with the buyer, and you've already been told about that. So you really have to think this one through and what is the best way to treat it. Take the time to really think it through. That's one type of scenario question. Now here is the other one. Here's the long scenario. It starts out with the seller listing their property with an agent at 404, and the listing agreement calls for a 5% rate of commission. It's going to be split equally between listing and selling firms. There's going to be a $1,000 bonus paid. The oven, range, refrigerator, clothes washer, and dryer are to be included in the sale. And of course, they put this information out through the multiple listing system. The taxes are $3,600 yearly. They're paid by the seller for the full calendar year on January 15th of the year. After 30 days on the market, no offers, the seller agrees to adjust the price to $394. An offer is submitted through the buyer's agent for $384, which includes the oven, range, and refrigerator, but not the washer and dryer. The offer calls for FHA financing, 3.5% down, and for the seller to pay 6% towards the buyer's closing costs. Closing is to occur on August 15th of this year. The contract is contingent on an appraisal at the contract price or higher, and the seller agrees to counter the buyer's offer at a price of $394. Closing cost credit for the buyer will be 3% if, and they'll make this counter if the agent will forego the $1,000 bonus. The agent agrees to forego the bonus. The purchaser accepts the counter offer. Purchaser makes loan application. Oh my gosh. The appraisal comes in at $390. The seller agrees to reduce the price to the appraised value. Additional income documentation is required by the lender, and it delays the closing. At the walkthrough, the buyer sees that the washer and dryer have been removed and threatens not to close unless the seller makes sure they're put back. Closing occurs on August 20th. Prorations are to be calculated on a calendar year, 365-day year. And by the way, if they give you prorations, they tell you which way to prorate it, whether it's statutory, banker's year, or calendar, 365-day year. The day of closing belongs to the seller. They'll also give you that on prorations. And here are things they could ask you about. Just think about all the things that net to the seller after they pay the commission. Negotiation of the bonus, extension of time for closing, proration of the taxes, closing costs, the washer and dryer. So there are lots of things that they can ask you about. I want to give you just a few questions, but I promise you I won't make it too hard. Because see, if I give you this question, and by the way, this question actually has a way to answer it. Don't launch it yet, Donna. Don't launch it yet. Here's what I want you to know. You don't lose the scenario. You don't lose the scenario. So here you are with the question in front of you. If I take you back to the scenario, here we go. It was listed at $404. Listing agreement calls for a 5% rate of commission to be split equally. There's a $1,000 bonus. Calls for the oven, refrigerator, clothes washer, and dryer are published in MLS to be included in the sale. This information is published. Taxes of $3,600 yearly. After 30 days on the market, the price is adjusted. The offer is submitted for $384. It includes the oven and refrigerator, but not the washer and dryer. Calls for FHA financing and for the seller to pay 6% closing costs for the buyer. Tells you closing is to occur on August 15th. Contracts contingent on an appraisal at the contract price or higher. The seller agrees to counter at $394. Closing cost credit for the buyer of 3%, but they say the agent's got to forego the $1,000. The agent agrees to forego the bonus, and the purchaser accepts the counter and makes loan application. The appraisal comes in low. Seller agrees to reduce it to that appraised value. The additional income documentation is required. It delays the closing. We close on the 20th, but the buyer is now ballistic because the washer and dryer aren't there, and they expected them. Prorations on a 365-day year. Day of closing belongs to the seller. What was the question again? After paying the commission and the buyer's closing cost, what is the seller left with? Now you can launch that question. Some of you are wishing you could go back to that scenario right now. Now, unfortunately, the way that Zoom is set up, I can't take you back there right now and still keep this poll launched. But here's the good news. If you were on the real PSI test or Pearson VUE or AMP test, if you were taking the real test, you could go back and revisit the scenario after looking at this question. And so you could clear up any of the questions you have. It's not so much that this is difficult math. Right now, I suspect some of you are struggling with remembering exactly what it said. Go ahead and close it up, Donna. Next time you'll know to look when we go back to it. So the bulk of you said 358, 8. 358, 8. And let's just see. And it's not a difficult calculation, is it? But each one of these numbers is plausible in that it was based on other numbers in the scenario. So that if you left the $1,000 bonus in, this is where you would have come up. If you'd had 384 or 394, this is where you might have been at these numbers. If you had trouble with the actual math, because the way I did it, really, I just go 390,000 minus 8%, because all of the percentages are based on the sale price. The 3% closing cost paid for the buyer and the 5% brokerage fee. They're all based on the sale price. So I just took 8% from 390 and got 358.8. But if you have difficulty with the math, just go to the on-demand webinar page. It's the same one that we send you to register. Go to that on-demand page and you can take that real estate math review again. All right. The next question about the same scenario. With respect to the washer and dryer, don't launch the question yet. Don't launch it. I want everyone to look at this question, understand what they're asking you. Either the seller's got to replace it, the buyer's has to close even though it's not there, the seller's broker has to replace it, or the buyer's broker must replace it. One of those is a true statement and the other three are not. To see which one is a true statement, we have to know what the scenario says, and then we have to know about contract law. So you can see where this is a bit challenging, because it's not just looking at the scenario. What you know about contract law is really impacting on your answer to this. So I know it's listed at 404. I know they're offering a $1,000 bonus, 5% brokerage fee, and they say that the oven range, refrigerator, clothes washer, and dryer to be included in the sale. Then there aren't any offers, so they reduced the price, and that gets an offer in at $384, and the offer includes the oven and the oven range and refrigerator, but it doesn't include the washer and dryer. And the seller counters the offer, but they don't counter the appliances to be included. And we go to closing, and that's when the buyer is upset because they saw where it was going to be offered to them. So now you can launch that question. I think we can show the results now. And by the way, over half of you said that the buyer's got to close without the washer and dryer. And maybe something else gets negotiated, but really, according to the law, Which contract are we talking about? The listing is not a contract between the buyer and the seller. And ads are not a contract. When the seller says, this is how I offer it for sale, if the buyer doesn't include that in the contract, and those are not fixtures, but they are chattels, if they are chattels, then here's what you know. You know that the buyer has to close without it because the contract had to mention chattels in order for them to convey. It had to mention it. Excellent, excellent job. So you not only had to get it correct on the one end, you had to get it correct on the one end where you knew that the washer and dryer were not included in the sale. So you had to know that, but you had to know who were the parties to the agreement and that an offer put in the paper or an ad is not a contract. It's not a contract. So there we go. The buyer must close without the washer and dryer. By the way, if you had any difficulty with that over understanding contracts, again, there's an on-demand webinar, and that means you don't have to wait for the date that it's given. It's on the page there, and it's contracts and contract law that you might want to take a look at to make sure that you understand how that works. On the closing disclosure, on a closing disclosure, how much is the brokerage fee or commission going to be, and how will it be displayed? I want you to take a look at all the possible answers. And once again, once you know what those answers are and what they're looking for, we'll go back to the scenario. So we're talking about the brokerage fee. Well, we had 5% of 404 plus $1,000, but I don't think that's where it ended up. And then we had 5% of 384. I'm sorry, 394. We had 5% of 394, but we cut out the bonus. And the agent did agree to forego the bonus. So now we're just straight at 5% on a sale price. But now it doesn't stay at 394 because the appraisal comes in low. And when the appraisal comes in low, that drops the brokerage fee as well because it wasn't a flat fee. It was a percentage-based brokerage fee. So when we get to that, now you can launch that question. Give you 10 more seconds if you want to get a vote in. That's it, Donna. All the time they get. Excellent. So what we have is 19.5 debit to the seller is the top answer. Of course, then we have one that's a debit to the seller and a credit to the buyer. And we have two that mentioned it that way, and then 20,500 debit to the seller. And let's take a look and remember where we went with that scenario. So here we go. For the most part, you got it right because the price ended up being $390 and it's a 5% brokerage fee. And that $1,000 that would have made it $20,500 is gone. But the one thing that may be confusing is it a debit? Is it a credit? How do we even balance this out on a closing disclosure? What's a debit? What's a credit? So here's what I want you to know. If you're confused about debits and credits, coming up on December 17th, we have Conquering Closing Costs. If you're already going to have your real estate license by then, maybe you just want to go back and look at our map on demand webinar. So it is the 19.5 debit to the seller. The buyer has nothing to do with the brokerage fee. It's not paid to the buyer, it's paid to the agent. Hoping that makes sense. Okay. The elimination of the $1,000 bonus should be addressed in. Well, where do they address that? Now, I could take you back to the scenario, but in this case, I don't think you need to go back to the scenario. There is a $1,000 bonus that was listed with a $1,000 bonus, and now it's been eliminated. Where was it eliminated? Give you 10 seconds if you want to get a guess in, or change yours. And time's up. Okay, the overwhelming majority of you did say that it's in the purchase and sale agreement. I want to just think about that for a minute, and I want us to take a look at what that might be. Now, we did have some of you who said, wait a minute, you go back to the original listing, that was addressed in the listing. So you're going to go back and you're going to alter the original listing agreement. You're going to do an amendment to it. And some of you are saying there's an agreement between the seller and the agents because this probably would have been split between both of them, and then an agreement between the seller and the listing agent. And by the way, 22% of you took that answer. Oh. And there we go. An agreement between the seller and the listing agent. The original listing agreement, you don't need to go back to. All you need to do is have an agreement between the seller and the listing agent. The seller didn't have any contract to pay the other agent anything. The other agent was being paid by the listing agent. Whatever those two agents work out is between them. We'll let them work out how that split's going to go. But that seller has their own agent say, we'll forego it. Now, if the other agent goes, if their agent goes to the other agent and gets an agreement there, so much the better. But that's not who the seller needs an agreement with. And certainly the purchaser isn't even a party to this. So no changes to the brokerage fee or commission need to be addressed in a purchase and sale agreement. Hope that's making sense to everyone. Excellent job you're doing. We said that these scenario questions may or may not contain certain forms. If you are in one of those states that uses state mandated forms, I want you to be absolutely familiar with your state mandated forms. Absolutely familiar. They are likely to test based on forms, and it will be, if this is a scenario, it's probably going to be state-based. If it is on national, it'll probably be on a nationally recognized form like that, which is put out by the CFPB, the closing disclosure form. Now, they could have a fake sales contract, but they're more likely to put it in a scenario. So do get yourself very familiar with the closing disclosure form and with the loan estimate form. Those are two forms that I just want you to know where things go on them before you take your exam. And it'll be a completed form, and they'll give you directions as to what you're to find. And it may not have all the blanks filled in, and it will ask you to calculate what goes in a particular blank. So this could look like this. According to the listing agreement, what happens if the listing expires on Friday, is relisted by a different company on Saturday, and is sold to a buyer who saw it on Thursday before the listing expired? And that's not based on law typically. That's going to be based on what is written into a listing agreement. If you have a state that has state-specific agreements, then you certainly should be aware of what it says. If it doesn't, and they give you a listing agreement, then you're going to have to look to that protection clause and see what it says. Or it could be, how does the contract address what happens if the appraisal is for less than the purchase price? And we don't want to make assumptions about it. The contract will address that. Or according to the closing disclosure, what was the daily charge for interest on the new loan? And that means that if they have the entire number, you may have to break it down to daily. That may end up being a math question again. So here we go. What questions do you have?
Thank you, Jill. Sorry about that. Took me just a second to get my microphone off of mute. You know, you've done such a thorough job throughout here that we actually don't have any open student questions. So at this point, I think, oh, no, I'm sorry, one just popped up. Oh, Richa, it looks like your question got cut off. So if you'd like to, there, I see. So we have another question about from an individual student asking if their state will provide them with scenario-based questions. So once again, for students, if you'd like to take a look in your candidate handbook, which can be gotten through your CE Shop course, or with a simple Google search. If you type in Richa, it looks like you're from North Carolina. So North Carolina real estate salesperson or broker, whichever one you're going for, candidate handbook, you will be able to open that up and see all of the information that will be relevant to your licensing exam, including whether or not your exam will have scenario-based questions. Is that accurate, Jill?
That is accurate. North Carolina happens to be a broker state. So everyone will take a broker exam. And I looked it up before I put this class together, but I don't want to go on memory. So please do look it up in your candidate guidebook. Thanks, Jen.
Absolutely. And so we've got one more coming in. Again, for students, if you didn't come up with any throughout the course, because Jill is incredibly thorough, no worries at all. Any notes that you took throughout, now's a great time to enter those into the question and answer. If you've got questions specific to scenario-based questions that you think might be on your exam, now's a great time. Go ahead and type those into that Q&A box. When you do amendments, is the student's question. Can we talk about examples of amendments and how those would pertain to scenario-based questions? So amendments to contracts specifically, contracts and scenario-based questions.
Sure, absolutely. And I will tell you that I'm not familiar with actually saying a contract and then an amendment to the contract, that's typically covered in the scenario where they address that it was amended. But if you did see it, keep in mind that if the amendment is signed by all the parties, then it does change the contract. It amends or changes the contract. So you'll have to look to that document. But more likely is the case, if you're going to see changes, you're going to see that long story where I alluded to an amendment being made. Or no, I don't think, yeah, I alluded to an amendment being made to change the closing date. And you might have seen a question saying what form was used to change the closing from August 15th to August 20th. And since there was already a contract in place, that would have been an amendment, not an addendum. Does that answer the question now?
Well, I think it offers some great insight. We'll give the student just a second to let us know whether that answered his question or not. And you know, in the meantime, it looks like we have thoroughly answered most questions for students because we don't have many in our question and answer area. So I'd like to take just a second and give you an opportunity. You know, you've talked sort of throughout about these strategies for tackling scenario-based questions. Oh, and we do have a note from the student that did answer his question. So thank you so much. So at this point, any sort of holistic strategies to tackling these scenario-based questions? Because obviously, you know, the individual questions that students will be faced with will vary widely, you know, based on the content. So any last minute strategies that you have to share with?
Yeah, at least, and here's what I want you to do. I want you to do a little practicing with them. I think for most of you, you were correct when you answered and you said, listen, when you're doing scenario-based questions, it's better to go ahead and read the whole thing and see if there are going to be changes first, and then go to the questions. So the first thing I would say is make sure that you at least give that method an opportunity. I know that works really well for me. On the shorter scenario questions, understand that you're going to be faced probably with at least 2 and maybe 3 correct answers. One that has 2 points, 2 that have 1 point. It could be only one that has 2 points and one that has 1 point. And on those, I don't want you to kill yourself struggling over it and waste all of your time. So when I talk about exam taking strategies in general, here's what I want you to do. If you don't feel confident that the one you're taking is absolutely the best answer, then don't struggle. Mark that question for review. Just mark it for review. And then if you finished all of the questions on the exam, you can come back and revisit it. Remember that when I talk about scenario questions, and I don't know if I even made this clear to you, the scenario can be a completed document, it can be a story, it can be just a short story, but the point is it will have more than one question about that which is being described to you. And if you are met with that, I want you to mark if you're not sure, just like you would anything else. But if you don't have time to get back to it, remember that if you were guessing and you'd still be guessing, your first guess is generally the right one.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jill. We've got some sort of technical questions about the exams themselves. One is, it seems that scenario-based questions may only appear on the state portions of the exam, and whether students are also likely to see those on the national portion of the exam.
So the answer is they can be on the national portion in some states. So it's not only on state portions. In some states, you will see them only on the state. In some states, you will see them on the national, and that's actually an agreement between the state and the exam provider and what they've decided is the best way to test it.
That's a great distinction. Thank you. Thank you for that question, and thank you, Jill. And another question specific to the exam, which you may have just answered. This student asks, so the state and national exam answers are calculated by points. And is that exclusively true for all exams in all states?
Well, okay, when I say points, yes, points, but they're, and again, I'm going to send you to your own candidate handbook to look to see if they have any sort of equalizer or balance in that. But typically, yes, the points matter, okay? The points matter on this exam.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Jill. It looks like we may have, once again, it looks like we may have answered all of our, oh, no, I'm sorry, one more question. And students, one more time, we've got plenty of time here before the hour ends. So if you have any questions, please do go ahead and type those into the Q&A before we ask Jill to just rack her brain for any more tidbits. Do go ahead and type your questions into that question and answer so we can make sure that we're addressing what you want to hear. Do you always combine the percentages when applying deductions from a total sale price? This particular student has a specific calculation in mind. And in this context, Rachel, I'm sorry, the specific calculation that you're mentioning may not translate to a verbally answered question. Jill, do you need more clarification to what this question's about?
No, I think I can address it. And what I would say, Rachel, is this: be very careful. The only time you can do that combining of the percentages, is when you know that they all apply to the same number. Oftentimes, you will see that one percentage applies to one number, the other applies to, say, the loan amount, one applies to the sale price, one applies to the loan amount. So be very, very careful when you use it. I was able to use it in that case because the closing costs being paid were a percentage of the sale price, and the brokerage fee was a percentage of the sale price. If you aren't sure and it makes it uncomfortable for you, don't worry about the shortcut. You've got plenty of time to do the 5% and the 3%. Better not to take the chance if you aren't positive.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm glad you understood that was to a specific example that you shared. And I think that probably speaks to taking your time and going through the scenario-based questions, and especially with math-specific questions, just to double check your work and do each step by step, just to make sure that you've got each step picked out, right?
Good advice, Jen. Good advice.
Just throwing my 2 cents in. All right, well, Jill, I'll give you one more opportunity to throw in any more strategies or tips and give students just another minute to type in any questions that they might have that we can address in the time remaining. So Jill, just can't get enough of your voice. Do you have any more tips for us?
I wish I did, Jen. My brain is very, very empty at this point, but what I would say is I want to wish everyone, I would say good luck, but don't count on luck. Really understand the concepts. If I were to say anything, make sure you understand concepts. More of the questions that you deal with will be questions that are based on what you know, but they're not just asking you to dump out what you know. So I want you to understand concepts as you go through this.
Wonderful. So rather than good luck, maybe wishing everybody a very focused test-taking experience.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, well, in the absence of any additional questions, I think we'll just say thank you to everyone. We really appreciate you being here. And I'd especially like to thank Jill for joining us today. Your knowledge, expertise, and the willingness to share it with our student community is greatly appreciated. So everyone, please look out for an email from us with a link to today's recorded session, and keep an eye out for invites to additional webinars in the near future. We do have some exciting ones coming up. We have Understanding Concepts and Principles of Value on November 5th, Advertising and Technology, Federal Laws on November 12th. Understanding Federal Financing Regulations on November 19th, and we do have some already lined up for December as well. So just keep an eye out. We will be sending you invites to those, and you can always access those upcoming from the same page where you can see our pre-recorded and on-demand webinars, which are great study tools for anybody preparing for their test, in addition to the study materials offered within your course. Reviewing any of these webinars like you've seen today are great study materials for you. So also, when this webinar ends, we invite you to complete a survey. If you're able to take a minute, we'd love your feedback so we can continue to provide valuable webinars to you to continue to provide you with those study materials. Thank you again for joining us today, everyone, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.